By 1536, Henry VIII was becoming infatuated with Jane Seymour as he became more infuriated with Anne Boleyn. He was getting annoyed because she was failing to provide him a male heir, which is his great matter, which is what he needed the most. And also her personality was quite an off-put, as she was quite flirtatious and assertive, which was a big contrast with Jane Seymour, who was a lot more calm, which made her more appealing to Henry at this point. And Anne also had strong opinions on policy, which earned her enemies at court. And considering this court was also very big and grand, it meant that gossiping was common. So gossiping about her being adulterous was becoming quite common. And some people believe that Cromwell conspired to bring Anne down, but you can decide for yourself whether you believe this or not, because he was aware of Anne's role in the fall of Wolsey and obviously didn't want to share this fate. And also they had differences in policy. For example, after the dissolution of the monasteries, Anne wanted to spend this money on things such as education, whereas Cromwell wanted to spend it on royal spending. And Cromwell had a key role in Anne's downfall because he tortured witnesses and persuaded Henry that Anne was cheating on him and was guilty of the crime. However, some believe that Cromwell was just doing his job, and Henry obviously wanted Anne to go, so he just provided that excuse and did what he was asked to. And so Anne was found guilty on the 15th of May 1936 and was executed on the 19th. Henry was quick to marry Jane Seymour as he was desperate for a male heir, since Mary and Elizabeth had both become illegitimate at this point, and the Acts of Succession from 1534 was meant to make Henry Fitzroy the new heir, but he died shortly after this took place, which meant that Henry had no heir whatsoever anymore. But then Jane gave birth to Edward on the 12th of October 1537, which strengthened the succession and gave Henry a male heir, which is what he always wanted. And it showed Henry's actions were acceptable to God, he believed, and also meant he was truly in love with Jane Seymour, which made it sad when she died less than 2 weeks after giving birth to Edward. And then Henry went into mourning for 2 years and didn't remarry. And also after her death, the Seymour family became very influential because Henry wanted to thank Jane for all she did, even though she wasn't alive. And so her brother Edward became Earl of Hertford and Duke of Somerset. So I'm going to move on now to Cromwell again and his reforms. So firstly, he reformed the Royal Council, as he said it was too big, as it had over 100 members. So instead he replaced it with something called the Privy Council, which only had 20 members. And this was better because it was made of lawyers and professionals rather than noblemen like the Royal Council was. And also it meant Cromwell could stop one person dominating, as there was less people and they all had an equal status. And then he also reformed the Council of the North, which had existed since 1472 and aimed to improve how the north of England was ran. But then Cromwell made it permanent and more effective after the Pilgrimage of Grace, which was mainly in the north. He wanted to tighten his and Henry's grip on the north of England. And then he also made some financial reforms. So traditionally, the King's Chamber was used to record income, but after the dissolution of the monasteries, which we'll get to later on, something stronger was needed to control the amount of money coming in. And so the Court of Augmentations dealt with property and income from the monasteries, and also the Court of the First Fruit and Tenths was put in place to collect taxes from the clergy, which previously went to the Pope in Rome, but obviously now they're both in Rome, so it comes to the government. And also he reformed Wales because in 1536 he made it officially part of England, which meant English was declared as the official language there, and they also were given 26 MP representatives in government. One of Cromwell's key reforms was to Parliament, as at the start of Henry's reign, Parliament didn't meet very often and its role was limited to approving taxation. But then Cromwell developed it into a bigger role, similar to what it is today. So he and the King used Parliament to gain support from significant people, such as the nobility, and it also strengthened the King's authority as it showed people approved of his ideas, so like MPs in Parliament. And Cromwell had to ensure there was support from Parliament, and so he did this by controlling parliamentary business, which meant he ran as an MP, so he could guide debates to his advantage, and he also used threat and intimidation to undermine opposition. and now laws are passed by Parliament and not by Henry, and he made less decisions through the Royal Council and less by royal proclamation. In 1539 there was a threat of a Catholic crusade against England by Charles V, and so Henry decided to marry Anne of Cleves, as this would give him a European ally because Cleves is in Germany. Yes. The Duke of Cleves was happy to marry Anne off, unlike many others, because Henry had a reputation for killing his wives by this point, which people didn't necessarily like. But Germany was a reformist state, and so it needed allies, as did England. And also Henry wanted more male heirs because he had Edward, but he wanted more than this. And Cromwell was a reformer, so he believed that the marriage would strengthen the Protestant ideas at court, which was quite important to him. But then, on meeting Anne of Cleves, Henry took an immediate dislike to her and shouted, "I like her not, I like her not," and called her the Flanders mare, which basically meant she looked like a horse, so that's nice. But then the marriage went ahead anyway after persuasion from Cromwell. But then in 1540, the threat of an invasion from Catholic Crusaders had declined, and so the marriage wasn't necessarily needed anymore, so it got annulled. But then Anne was still granted the States, and she became the king's sister, so she still had some kind of importance in England, but the marriage was annulled. And Henry blamed Cromwell for this failure, since he's the one who tried to push it and kind of forced it to go ahead, even though he knew Henry didn't want it to go ahead, just because Cromwell wanted to strengthen these Protestant ideas. And so this caused Henry to want to return to Catholic values instead, so it kind of was a failure for Cromwell. So like Wolsey, we can now start to discuss Cromwell and his downfall. And so the Duke of Norfolk had a big influence on Cromwell's fall because he hated him, because he supported Protestant ideas, whereas Norfolk was a Catholic. And also he had a big influence over Henry, which he was probably jealous of. So after the failure of Anne's marriage, Thomas Howard, which is his real name, instructed Catherine Howard, his niece, to spread rumours about Cromwell, for example, that he wanted to introduce Protestantism against the king's wishes, which he was probably worried about anyway after Anne's marriage. And so Cromwell was also hated by the French because they saw him as a heretic, and so removing him from power would improve relations between England and France. And he also had enemies in church and at court because they resented the dissolution of the monasteries and the execution of John Fisher and Thomas More, which we'll get into later on. So they voted for something called the Act of Attainder, which basically meant he was executed without a trial. So this took place on the 20th of July 1540. And also, kind of fun to mention, in 1541, Henry actually admitted that he regretted the death of his most faithful servant, and he blamed the people at court for deceiving him because he had a jousting accident, which made him quite irritable, and so it made him quite rash when making decisions, and it made him quick to blame others, as we can see here. So now we've finished going along the timeline of this topic, but now we can go back and look at things in more detail. So the first thing I want to look at in detail is religion. And so first we could just talk about the differences between Catholicism and Protestantism. So for Catholics, they accept the Pope as head of the Church, and they have seven sacraments, and they also believe in something called transubstantiation, which means basically the bread and the wine is actually Jesus' body and blood instead of just representing it. Whereas Protestants believe that monarchs should lead and protect their own churches and only believe in 3 sacraments. And then going back to Catholics, they believe that services and readings should be in Latin, and it should also go on pilgrimage, which is very encouraged. But then Protestants believe that the Bible and services should be in the language that is spoken in that country, so English, and also don't really believe in pilgrimage as being necessary. And then going back to Catholics, they also believe in something called chantries, which basically means prayers for the dead, and also indulgences, which are certificates that you can buy that forgive your sins. And then going back to Protestants, they believe that these are corrupt and unnecessary, and faith alone needs you to get into heaven. So I think it's quite good to look at those differences so you know what's going on, what this is talking about. But at the start of Henry's reign, he was very hostile to Protestant ideas and was actually called the defender of the faith. in 1521 after writing a book called In Defence of the Seven Sacraments. And also Wolsey publicly burned Luther's texts, who was kind of the main preacher of Protestantism at that time. And so it's quite interesting to see how he went from being such a Catholic to still being Catholic. He never stopped being Catholic, but he obviously became more lenient for Protestant ideas, which we can start getting into. Henry campaigned against the Catholic Church, mostly for his desire for an annulment, but also he liked some Protestant ideas, for example, the king ruling the church, because obviously that was an advantage to him. And also many of his advisors were sympathetic towards Protestant ideas, for example Cromwell being a big influence of this. And also there was allegations of corruption in the church, which Henry didn't like and wanted to act against. But mostly it was for the annulment and his own gain. And so, for example, the Act of Succession in 1534 stated that Henry could choose his own heir, and so he could make Mary illegitimate. And this was the final rejection of the Pope's authority in England and stopped any of his influence anymore. So, for example, the Pope's name was crossed out of English prayer books, which was quite significant. And then moving on, the Act of Supremacy, also in 1534, established the king's control over the English church. And so he had powers now that were previously held by the Pope. So Henry could decide how the church was organised, its religious beliefs, and also he could do things such as appoint bishops. Henry also controlled the church's income and wealth, which led to the setting up of the Court of Augmentations and the Court of the First Fruit and Tenths, which we see Cromwell do previously. And also a clause in the Act of Succession is the Oath of Succession. And this meant that all individuals had to swear an oath to Henry as being the new head of the church. So basically they have to say that they agree to it and they accept it. And they also had to swear Anne Boleyn as their queen. And then the Treason Act of 1534 expanded its definition to include people speaking out against the royal supremacy or refusing to take the oath of succession as being treason and punishable. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please like and comment any videos you want down below. Choose Protestantism against Henry's wishes. This is really complicated. I'm going to refilm this.